There are some people that will come in and say, I'm going to grow 1,000,000 oysters immediately. And I say, whoa, 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 whoa. And maybe you could start with 50 or 100,000. You can have plenty of time to kill 1,000,000.
Welcome to Oyster-ology, a podcast about oysters, aquaculture, and everything from spat to shuck. I'm your host and the food walker, Kevin Cox. I recently took a field trip to the Virginia Aquaculture Conference to meet producers, scientists, chefs, manufacturers, and suppliers to the oyster and aquaculture world in this part of the country. It was there that I had the chance to sit down with my guests, Heather Ketcham and Myron Horzesky of Ketcham Supply, a New Bedford, Massachusetts institution that started as a wire lobster trap operation and, almost by accident, became part of the early story of modern oyster gear, which helped drag oyster farming out of the dredge and prey era and into the age of cages, floats, and smarter systems. Heather is the second-generation owner and chief executive officer of Ketcham Supply. After 2 decades in biotech and corporate operations, Heather returned to her maritime roots in 2016 to lead the family business, which was founded in 1975 by her father, Bob Ketcham, who pioneered the first wire mesh lobster trap and grew the small company into one of the premier suppliers and manufacturers of high-quality aquaculture and fishing gear. Myron is one of the OG dyed-in-the-wool employees of Ketcham, who started by stacking bricks as a kid and worked his way up to chief operations officer, learning about every bend of wire and length of rope produced by Ketcham. He joined Heather and me in our conversation and, as you'll hear, is no wallflower when it comes to aquaculture gear. Together, Heather and Myron painted the colorful mosaic of how Ketcham is helping oyster growers across the country figure out what floats, what sinks, and what keeps an oyster farm humming. It's a conversation about craftsmanship, problem solving, and why the future of oyster farming can come down to 2 simple rules: know your site and start smaller than your ego. So adjust your floating cages and add some weight to those anchors as we hear about how a few martinis can lead to a new career, what Rolls-Royce and oyster gear have in common. Is today's society really softer? The meaning of one person, one cage, how bird poop leads to innovation, the power of listening, and why size matters, with owner, operator, innovator, and a duo of industry-leading gearheads, Heather Ketcham and Myron Horzesky. Heather Ketcham and Myron Horzesky.
Nice job on the last name.
Welcome to Oyster-ology. You guys are with Ketcham Supply Company in New Bedford, Mass.
Right.
And we are together here at the Virginia Aquaculture Conference in Newport News, Virginia. It's really cool. I mean, it's amazing to see so many people gathered together talking about equipment and tech and oysters and farming and all the other stuff. So I am so glad that we had this opportunity to get together because I want to hear all about Ketcham Supply, what you guys do, and where you came from. So Heather, I want to start with you. You were not originally involved in this kind of business, right? You were involved in more of a science-based sort of thing?
I was. So after college, I worked in biotech for 20 years. 10 years ago, a very late night after drinking several martinis with my father, probably the early morning hours, he had the discussion that I'm retiring now and I'm selling my business. And I think you should be the one to come back and buy it and try to run it.
And what was your reaction to that?
It's one of those things. He'd been poking at it for a few years. And that was the night that I said, yeah, let's do it.
And so what year was that?
That was 2016.
And is your father still involved at all in this?
So not in the day-to-day operation. He spends his winters in Florida. He comes back every spring up to where we are in Massachusetts and comes in and tells us everything we're doing wrong. And
so he's
it
got the
helps
perfect
us.
job. In other
And
words.
yeah, no, he still loves to come in and talk to the guys and see the fishermen in the store. And it's worked out well for him. He still gets to keep his paws in there. Yeah.
Is this something that you had in the back of your mind that you might one day do, or where were you headed before those drinks with your dad?
So I was in biotech. I love doing startup biotechs,
Oh.
getting small companies off the ground. It was a lot of fun. I was at a point with the company that I was at where it's kind of stalled out and the timing just worked out really well for both of us. Yeah.
Sometimes that's just the way it works,
Yeah.
right? Now, Myron, your story is a little bit different.
Sure.
Tell me about how you first got involved with Ketcham Supply.
So when Bob moved in to the neighborhood, let's say I was a neighborhood kid. So, we're 14-year-old kids, got, hair down on my ass, cranking heavy metal, the big boom boxes, and hanging out basically in the loading dock area. At the time when he moved in, the upstairs was vacant. And he actually put a basketball hoop up for the neighborhood kids to hang out. One day while I was hanging out there after school, he had come out and he had a customer with him. And he said, hey, if you're not doing anything, would you like to come by tomorrow, fill out an application, feel like a job after school? So that's how I started working for the company. And my job at the time, being a 14-year-old kid, was basically pulling up bricks on a block and tackle. And then at the time, it was basically a core lobster pot business. Because that's how we started originally as Ketcham Traps.
And you're the chief operating officer
Yes.
at Ketcham, right? And you're the boss.
Yeah.
We have a very kind of synergistic skill set, so it works out really well. Yeah.
So you've seen a lot of changes there since you started.
Absolutely. I'm a high school graduate. I graduated high school. I went work with the company full time. 19 years old, pregnant girlfriend, the whole 9 yards. And that job turned out to be a great career. And being taught to take care of your people that work for you, the people under you, to rely on them to do their job and let them do their job. These are all things that Heather and Bob have taught me over the 45 years that I've been doing this.
Yeah.
Pretty proud of how things have turned out at the end of the day.
It sounds like the approach that your father and you, Heather, have taken is like a family business.
We're definitely a family business. Yeah.
Yeah,
A
cool.
lot of long-term employees. We don't have a lot of turnover.
How many employees do you currently have?
About 20.
No kidding. Tell me a little bit about Ketcham Supply and what you do.
So how we got into this business, when I was born, my father was a lobsterman. And
Oh.
he was one of the first guys to start making lobster traps out of wire. So the other guys on the dock were like, hey, that's really cool. Will you make those for me? And that's how the business started in our garage. So then, over the years, the neighbors complained and we got kicked out of the garage and, started building lobster traps. And then in the 1980s, we're approached by the first oyster grower to kind of help him use these materials to make something to hold his oysters. So this is why a lot of the oyster gear you see is made out of the same wire material as lobster traps. They came to a
Yeah.
lobster trap factory to help them figure out how to grow their oysters and protect their oysters.
So then at that time, most of the oyster farmers in the area were doing just on-bottom dredging.
On bottom, it wasn't a very profitable business. They didn't have the resilient seed. So the industry's come a long way in the last, 15
I
years?
remember
Yeah,
the first
20
cages
yeah.
in 1980. Those were for cutting hung shellfish. And actually, that's an island that Bob grew up on, right?
Yeah.
Off the
Yeah.
coast of Massachusetts.
I've
Small
never
island.
heard of
With,
that.
with a one-room schoolhouse, K through 8.
Mhm.
So when you grow up on a small island like that, you learn how to do a lot of stuff and
Yeah.
fix a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
which comes in handy when you're starting a business manufacturing things.
And then from there, the business was born
Right.
for lobstermen.
For lobstermen, yep. So we were Ketcham Traps was the original
Ketcham
name
Traps,
of the
yeah,
company.
you-
Perfect name.
So I'm curious about those early oyster farmers who came to you guys and said, well, it holds shellfish, obviously, so I can get my oysters off bottom and put them in cages, right?
It makes it also easier, if you're just going to go down and you come up to a buoy, pull up a cage full of oysters versus dragging a dredge. Hey, I might catch it. I might be right in the right spot. Maybe the dredge comes up half
Yeah.
full or half empty. I know what's in my cage.
You can see the natural evolution away from dredging, although there is still a fair amount of dredging going on. Why is that? Is that just traditional?
Well, there's still the wild harvest dredging, but actually some of the oyster growers will grow, get a nice shape on their oyster, get it to a certain size, and then just, throw them on the bottom and go back and dredge for them later. And it's part of just gear utilization, or if you're in a small footprint, using the full water column.
Right. So when you took over, when your dad retired, what kind of evolution or changes have you made since then?
So we modernized things a little bit. We got off of paper and pencil for all of our records. And I think we invested a little bit more in molding and tools. So we've always been a wire fabrication shop. And now we've kind of worked our way back where we didn't have the floats that we wanted for our gear. So we went and invested and we have 4 or 5 different kinds of floats to work with our gear now. Um, Website, e-commerce store, just kind of bringing us into the 21st
I
century.
like to say that she brought us into the 21st century. I mean, I was still writing slips again 10 years ago. Now she's taught me to rely on the people that she's brought in and trust in other people when everything I would always take on myself.
Yeah, I think we're excited. We were able to expand our product range, have a lot of novel products, new things. Also, and we do distribute other products as well that we don't make. And I think we've really expanded our product line, with trying to offer kind of soup to nuts to all the growers.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've worked well together. She
Mhm.
came in and she didn't just come in and say, all right, this is the way things are going to be. You know,
Yeah.
people like the fact that she allows us to do things the way we do things, so to speak. You know, and of course, there's going to be changes and modernizations, and the future is the future, you know, and the future's looking bright.
So tell me about how you make your gear. You have a factory and you're cutting and bending wires and that sort of thing. Tell me a little about that.
Sure. So everything starts on basically 100-foot rolls of wire. And actually, my father built years ago custom machinery that kind of pinches and flattens it. We cut it to size, we bend it. We have a separate group of builders, and each person builds from start to finish. Whatever item it is, they get the order, they build it start to finish. They're responsible for it. They're responsible for the quality. That's worked really well. It's almost like a craftsman type job.
It really is almost like bespoke equipment made by one person. It makes me think about the old Rolls Royces made by hand, like the same people
Right.
made the entire vehicle, so they had a real sense of
Ownership.
Of ownership,
Yep,
that's right, and
absolutely.
personal pride. And it sounds like that's what you're doing with
And
your
that's-
folks.
It's one man, one cage. We don't have an assembly line.
Mhm.
Could we pump out a lot more if we had an assembly line? Maybe. But by having a one man, one cage, you're responsible. You have your pride in it.
Mhm.
Each guy will handle the tools a little bit differently and have their own little techniques that they use. But if you have an assembly line situation, the guy next to you doesn't care what you do, and the guy after him doesn't care what he did. And that's where you can run into problems. So if you have a man doing the same job, start to finish, you know the quality is going to be there as long as they're taking pride in it. And it takes a number of years to learn to do what we do because we do so many different things.
So each person that's involved in production knows the whole thing.
Correct. It takes on average about 3 to 5 years for me to learn how to build everything.
How do you do your training with people when you bring new people in?
Initially, we'll start them off on smaller projects and then slowly build them up. And that's why it takes 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk about the relationship that you guys have with farmers. It doesn't sound to me like it's just somebody comes and says, hey, I want to buy a basket, and they grab it and you never hear from them again.
We have long-term relationships with all our customers. I think both of our favorite thing is to go out on the farm and visit our customers, see what
Yeah.
they do. We learn so much from them. And anytime we do a new product, it's an iterative design process with the customers because we have what we think is the greatest idea in the world at the shop, but doesn't always handle the way we think in the water. So they come to us, they tell us what's working, what's not working, how can we make it better.
If we rely on our customers to tell us what they need versus us telling them what they need. They're on the water every day. They know exactly what they need, and you'd never tell anybody how to run their business.
We try to get out and visit as much as we can.
Mhm.
We try to call and check on people.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I haven't
You
heard
do.
from so-and-so in a while. Hey, let me give them a call. Not necessarily a sales call. And especially in my case, being in the industry as long as I've been in the industry, a lot of these farmers are my friends.
Yeah.
I mean, they know what an a-hole I am from time to time. And they've seen me after a
And
few,
they like it.
and they like it, and they've seen me after having a few cocktails at an event like this. So it's just, I'm very personally in touch with them. You know, they know my family. I know their family.
Just seeing people talking to you here, it's pretty clear that you're well known and well liked by people. So
Yeah. Like I said, it's a pleasure to be in this business, to be perfectly honest with you. Coming from the initial fishing background, when you get two lobstermen together, generally they don't help each other out. They don't want to work with each other. They're definitely not going to tell you where to put your lobster pots, and they're also going to say, "Get the fuck out of my ocean."
right.
Whereas the aquaculture people tend to work together. A lot of guys have made the same mistake over and over, or made the mistake, and they see somebody coming into the industry. they'll actually work with them and say, hey, I did this didn't work, and they'll help each other out. So it's quite different. Growing is so much different than fishing. So people will work together to help each other out. It's not so much like that in the fishing industry where we started.
It sounds like it's almost a different kind of person too. I think you had said fishing is just kind of like it's like gathering from the ocean and removing it, as opposed to farmers who are actually growing and nurturing, and in the process, cleaning the water, creating habitat, and all of this other stuff.
Right. And, it's nice to be on the green side of things. How's that?
Very well put. Yeah. So I'm trying to picture how you do this. If a new customer comes to you and says, hey, I need you guys to come out, tell me what I can do better. How does it work? How do you determine what you can do to help them improve their farming?
So I think before we go there, I think the questions we ask, what's your bottom like? How deep is your water? What's your water flow like? So even before we sell the first piece of gear, we try to understand what their site's like. So much of it is site specific for the gear selection and the issues that they're going to run across. And we always say start small as well. Don't go in and buy 1,000 cages until they're actually going to work on your site.
Do you get farmers who try and do that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there are some people that will come in and say, I'm going to grow 1 million oysters immediately. And I say, whoa, 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 whoa. Maybe you could start with 50 or 100,000. You're going to have plenty of time to kill 1 million. Why don't you start 50,000 at a time? And then find the best gear that suits your site.
Right.
And, what works for one place may not work for another based on, if it's bottom gear, if you get a lot of silt problems where your stuff can get buried, like you have bottom gear, you get silted in, it's all over for you. So you can silt in 1 million oysters, or you can silt in 10,000. Initially, I got gumbo mud down there. I can't walk out to it, or if I put a cage in it, the cage is going to be buried in 6 hours because it's just going to sink directly into the mud. And I say, well, maybe that's not the way you want to go. Maybe you want to have some kind of a long line system, some anchoring and some floating cages that float in the middle of the water column because you're not permitted being on the top of the water column, stuff like that.
Do you get a lot of old established farmers coming to you and say, I want to do it differently, I want to change, help me change?
So yes, it's a mix. A lot of the existing farms like to try new gear, try to be more efficient. A lot of the startup farms are people that have worked on other farms, which is great. And they can kind of ramp up on the side while they still have their day job. That's pretty common. And I think we've seen people be very successful doing that. And then we have new areas that are kind of new to farming, like down in Texas, where they're just no experience and going in all the way, going in hard. So
Going in hard. I like that.
Everything's bigger.
Everything is bigger in Texas, and they've done a nice job, and they've got some water down there, boy. That's a nice product. It's got a nice salt content to it. And salt, for me, being in the Northeast, I like a lot of salt content, but I think they make a terrific oyster down there.
I've met a few of these people who have a lot of money, want to, stop being lawyers and say, I'm going to become an oyster farmer, and they want to go big, right? It's kind of like the people who watch a few YouTube videos of sailing around the world with bikini-clad crewmates, and they spend all their money and they buy a 60-foot sailboat. They don't even know how to sail, and they jump on the boat and they think they're traveling around the world, and they usually come back with their tail between their legs in 6 months to a year.
We've had that similar experience. I remember, 30 years ago, people being in and out of the industry in 2 or 3 years, blow a bunch of money, get a bunch of equipment, and then not doing it properly, starting too big, too fast, too much, not knowing the site that they're working with. All of those things. Right. So what I'm noticing these days, people getting into the industry, they're building themselves up to be bigger, profitable farms versus coming in, blowing a bunch of dough, and actually leaving a bunch of gear out in the water, just leaving it there. Yeah. You want to have a good business plan when getting into it, and know your business to start, know your site, know your people. Help is very hard to find. Good help is very hard to find. And one thing I really like about this business is we find that women do very well in this business. And you ask a lot of farmers, some of the best people are the women they have on their crews.
Why do you think that is?
I think they just pay a little bit more attention, maybe. Maybe that. Also just being tough bitches.
That's what it takes, I think, right? I've heard this from other farmers as well, and there does seem to be a more rapid entry into the market of women farmers. Do you think it has something to do with the improved technology and gear as well? Because it used to be you had to be able to lift 200-pound baskets of oysters, and now that's changed a little bit, I think.
I think it's more approachable, and we're working to make it even more approachable going forward to be able to lift and move and handle equipment. And I also just think it's an interest for people like Nicolette, who I know you've interviewed, who's
Nicolette Mariano,
a great customer of ours who we love.
Treasure
But
Coast
she
shellfish.
came out of a biology program, and that's what she learned at school, and that's what she wanted to do. So I think we're getting just a lot of people through the university system that want to get into it now.
I think it's great. I think that there doesn't need to be any difference between men and women doing this kind of work.
And at the end of the day, in a lot of cases, you are handling boxes of rocks. These are tough women that know the industry when they get into it, know what they're getting into. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So you've told me what advice you would give to a new farmer. If a big established farmer comes to you and says, I want to start changing, how do you determine how they should do that?
So they probably have a lot of money tied up in their existing gear. They have their process start to finish. They have their work boats and everything they need to run it. So what we're seeing is they'll evaluate on a small scale, take a small piece of their farm, maybe set up a couple lines with different types of new gear, try it out for a year, and maybe grow into it over time if they think it's going to be better than their existing method. So they can compare them, like flush out all the bugs, make sure it's going to work correctly, because just to do a hot swap is not something we see people do. The other thing we see people do is the larger farms have so much space in different leases. They might try gear that's more appropriate for different areas. So they might break it up that way, or try new gear in a new area, and then just kind of replace older gear with the new stuff if it turns out to work for them.
Yeah, because there are obviously some financial barriers to entry in this business.
We have such a wide product range, so people can start with just floating bags with the plastic floats, and that's pretty inexpensive.
Yeah.
And then you go up to the big 6-bay floating cages, and those are a little more expensive. So we do see people starting by floating bags, and over the years build up to more and more gear.
Yeah. Well, I ask that mainly because, with the intensive design and manufacturing that you put into it, you're sort of building a Cadillac, whereas a lot of other companies are building Chevys, and there's usually a cost of
Yugos.
Oh, now we're really going back.
I'm showing my age, maybe. I don't know.
Now, I want to jump to something that you did a presentation on yesterday, and it's about birds.
Sure.
But the reason I want to talk about it isn't just about birds, but also about how you innovate and how you figure out to do new things and change things. But tell me about the bird problem and how that came about and how you guys addressed it.
Okay. So the FDA is kind of going after birds fouling on oyster gear.
I understand the problem. You got birds, they're sitting on the cages because there's nowhere else to sit out there in the water, and they're crapping on the cages, which creates biofoul, basically, and potential contamination, I suppose, of the product, right?
Mhm.
Is it that big of an issue?
It's getting a lot of attention, and you'll have farmers that say, look, I don't have birds at my farm. Why do I have to do it? But it's the cost of doing business at the end of the day.
Yeah.
People are paying attention, and, you see a bunch of crap on a cage, and minds start spinning whether someone's going to get sick. It can be questionable. People have been growing oysters on the surface for a number of years, and you don't hear about a lot of people getting sick from bird crap on an oyster. But at the same time, if the FDA it comes to the people who are producing the food, they want you to produce the food a certain way.
Yeah.
You do your best to follow the rules and abide by them.
When the cage is flipped in such a way that the oysters are out of the water and exposed and the birds are sitting on the cages, the oysters are pretty tightly closed at that point. And then when they flip back over and they're under the water, they're kind of getting washed off and the current's cleaning them. And
They're not filter feeding while they're up on the surface.
right, good thing. It's like,
If they were, they'd
this oyster tastes like shit.
As the gear supplier, we need to figure out how do we keep birds from landing on the gear. So there's a couple approaches. We need to create new gear that birds can't land on, but we also have to figure out a way to retrofit the existing gear that people have. So we've played with a lot of different spikes on the floats. We've made a new float with a shape that we think the birds aren't going to land on. Tested a lot of things. We've been doing it the last couple years, and we actually have a couple of ideas for going forward that we think are going to be the home run, hopefully, that it's going to help solve the problem for most of our customers. But yeah, it's been a long road, but we try everything.
Yeah. And again, this is a case where we work with our farmers to try out different things, bring different stuff over there. When it comes to Mother Nature and the birds, there's nothing perfect yet. We hope to come up with the perfect answer. There's a number of things that work very well, but at the end of the day, when you're handling them and you got to remove them and do the flipping, now you've added extra labor costs, and nobody's giving more money, unfortunately, for their oysters. So you try to find the delicate balance that's going to work for everybody. And there's a lot of gear out there now that needs to be retrofit.
And it's a lot of trial and error to figure out what works.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, we've been at it for a few years now. You need a lot more space if you're going to be taking spikes off and putting spikes on every time you go to flip the gear. I spoke with a customer about that yesterday. It's like, yeah, I realize I got to pull these things off every week to flip them. They work great, but where do I put them when I pull them off? And I got to put them back on. It's a pain in the ass for my crew. It adds time that I can only flip X number of cages now because I have to do that.
So stay tuned.
Picturing little electrical wires shooting currents and stuff. Exactly.
I think lethal control methods are probably out of the question. You can't be knocking them off and falling over dead in the water, But at the end of the day, it's about keeping people safe and having a safe product for people to eat.
Can you guys give me an example of a situation that you've had where a farmer has come to you with a problem, either with your gear or just a farming problem, and how they have really helped you innovate? They've come to you with a problem and you've now come up with some new solution that changes how you work for others as well.
But that still goes back to the original floating oyster cages.
Yeah.
I think just in the floating gear, putting a lot more flotation in them. So when the cages are flipped over, the whole cage actually clears the water and dries out all the way.
Right. If you put the standard oyster bag float on the sides of the cage, whenever you're flipping that bag, you might be drying one side of the oysters. Whereas like with our new float, you flip that over, that sits the oyster up what we like to call high and dry right out of the water. And now you're drying that bag whole time in the sun, whatever.
Right. It's an interesting thing. I hadn't thought about it. The oysters are heavy. Every farm has different size oysters or a different amount in a bag, which is going to affect the weight and therefore the amount of flotation that you need in the floats.
Right.
Yeah. I always like to say mine's the biggest. I mean, the float.
Yeah, we're still talking about oysters here, right? When I've talked to people about floats, especially in areas that are prone to really severe weather, hurricanes and that sort of thing, they talk about, well, when a storm is coming, we need to sink them. And I always thought it sounds like a hassle, but it is what it is. But then you got to get them back up. How does a farmer get 1,000 floating cages back up from the bottom?
Believe me, they're
It's
heavy.
a hassle.
They're boxes of rocks and they're very heavy. And it's, this is a miracle grow. This is work.
So that's something we think about a lot and talk about a lot and test ideas around. If you're in Maine, you do it once a year to get under the ice. You raise it in the spring. You do it once a year. It's on a schedule. You're in the Gulf Coast. You have to start preparing 3 or 4 days ahead of time when you see a storm coming. And oh my goodness, the storm went out to sea. So we just sunk the farm for nothing, raised it. So you, as a farm, you go through that exercise 2 or 3 times.
Oh my God.
You decide you're going to just batten down the hatches and go really heavy on your line and anchoring and just hope you can ride it out.
Ride it out, yeah.
So we're thinking through ways to help you ride it out a little better. Yeah.
One of the exercises I ask the guys to do when I'm speaking with them is, hey, every once in a while have your crew go sink 20 or 30 cages, see how long it takes to get them down, to get them up. Get used to the exercise.
Right.
Because you are going to want to protect your farm and your product at the end of the day when the hurricane, Mother Nature's a bitch. We had a farmer trying to save a few bucks and put 120 cages on one line with 2 5-foot auger anchors. And we had a nor'easter or something, and the stuff washed up onto the beach. And he comes in yelling and screaming at us. And I said, you just created a mile-long sail, and I'm the asshole. Okay. And again, unfortunately, the customer's always right?
Yeah. Well, I think we know the truth on that.
But I like to tell that story to people because I
It's
say,
a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
It's a cautionary tale. You go ahead and you anchor the shit out of your stuff.
Right.
Your anchors are your most thing. Your lines are the most important thing that holds your whole farm together. So anchoring is key. Don't try to save a few bucks on anchoring. Anchor. Heavy. Go heavy.
Because a 5 or 6 foot auger, basically it's a screw that you're screwing down into the bottom.
Yeah, because you could have a lot of mud and then we have a few feet of sand in there and you're going 5 feet in, you're only in 2 feet.
Right.
So knowing your site is very important and knowing what you need to do. And we have guys down in Virginia that have 350-pound pyramid anchors. And a hurricane comes, they ride the storm out.
Yeah. What other things in terms of new tech or new ideas and innovations are emerging that you can talk
I
about?
was going to say, what do we want to talk about?
Yeah, you don't need to give me any trade secrets.
Well, no, I mean,
There's a huddle in the corner right now.
well, we wish we could just find something that worked great for everyone, but this is not that kind of a business. I mean, besides finding cages that will lower themselves and raise themselves, that would be a great idea. It's a great idea in theory, but how can you make it work, right? So I think we're trying to solve one problem at a time. And I think one of our biggest concerns right now is to try to solve this bird problem. I think, and that's where we're investing quite a bit of money into doing that. So keeping the guys on the water and being able to sell their product is the most important thing, right? We like to say our new bird deterrent floor is part of our new tech as well. But again, it's not 100% perfect. We did find that we had some of the small gulls actually having sex on top of the float. So, I mean, any port of storm, I guess. Right?
Hey, listen, birds are birds, right?
I think right now we've got a lot of energy invested into bird deterrence, and I think that's going to be huge in this business. And again, a big part of our ideas are always coming from our customers. It's important. The customers, they're going to tell you exactly what they need and how we need to do it. So every once in a while, I'll go out and I'll go to a farm and I'll say, hey, I'm going to come out, but I'm going to bring my waiters. I'd like to spend a half a day. I don't want you to have to just run me out there, show me around. I want to work it out and work with the guys, whatever like that.
Right.
And it smartened me up about my retirement plan, though, because after doing that for about 4 hours and you get back to the dock handling those boxes of rocks, you realize how hard the people on the farm work. What a hard job this is to do. You better be tough. And it's tough these day and age to find a 20-year-old kid to do the job. It's a different world 40 years ago or 50 years ago when I was a kid.
What do you think the source of the labor problems is?
I mean, I think we're a little soft today. Is that okay to say? I grew up as a poor kid.
Right.
So I was 8 years old shoveling snow.
Right.
Out to make money and actually giving that to my mom. And I was always taught, you got to go out, you got to work for anything you're going to have.
Right.
I think a lot of people, as they grow, you want your kids to be much better than you, and you kind of make things easy on them.
Yeah.
So our society is much softer, but the oysters are hard.
That may have to be the caption of this episode. Heather, what do you think about that?
I think it's a work ethic thing. Like, we've talked about, we have a lot of long-term employees that are great, that work hard. In the instances where we do have to hire people, it's hard. It's probably every fifth person works out, maybe.
I mean, here I am approaching 60, and I've got a 20-year-old that's trailing me by 20 yards as I'm walking across the property. So when I walk out of my office and I walk out the front door, and I'm walking over the 100 yards over to the other building, I get this kid chasing me back there, and he's like 20 years old, and I'm like, I don't think he's going to work out. You're going to be able to catch up with Myron.
What would you say is the biggest challenge to what you're doing right now and also to what oyster farmers are confronting?
So it may be different for the farmer than us. The price of oysters for the farmer, unfortunately, has not really gone up. And while the cost of everything has.
Even though there's kind of what I perceive to be an oyster renaissance going on right now, and sales must be up, but prices are not.
Correct. And I think the oyster farmers have been working on that same oyster and that same price for a long period of time. And it's hard for us because we're trying to keep our pricing at a relatively affordable price on our gear, but our costs keep going up. And it's difficult for us to work with the farmer and say, hey, I got to go up on this gear, and it breaks my heart to do it. But then, what do we have to do on the other side? How do we handle it to try to keep our costs down? So it's very difficult, and it's unfortunate because the market has grown so much. You see those oysters at $3-4 a piece. The farmer's still getting his 60 cents if he's lucky sometimes.
Right. You see that kind of the costing and pricing is sort of the big issue as well.
Yeah. I mean, you talk to farmers, it's, that they're not getting enough for their product. Labor, I think, is the next
and
biggest
labor,
thing
and
for
again,
them.
this is a labor-intensive business. So if you can save money on labor, it's a great way, a good idea to do it. And that's where we try to help with coming up with different ways of flipping the gear, easier ways to flip the gear, handle the gear.
That really makes sense to me in terms of the direction in which one wants to innovate is making it easier so that either your labor costs go down because you don't need as much manpower, or you retain your labor longer because the job is a little easier is probably the wrong word, but you know.
No, whatever you can do to make the job easier for the farmer
Yeah.
is key.
Yeah.
We
Tell me
do.
about your storefront.
Yeah, we've always had a storefront. We're there Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. We have just where we're located in New Bedford, Massachusetts. We probably have at least a couple hundred farms in driving distance between, down to Cape Cod, Plymouth, Duxbury, Rhode Island.
Mhm.
So we have a lot of walk-in traffic for oyster farmers, but we're also just a few blocks up from the fishing pier. So all the fishing boats can come in and get rope and gloves and, supplies every time they go out fishing.
Right, because in addition to doing oyster gear, aquaculture gear, lobster traps, you also are doing things for sport fishermen and commercial fishermen and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I have to come check it out because, I'm a gearhead, and I have a feeling that walking through your store is like an aquaculturist's toy store.
So one of our slogans was that a fisherman's candy store, but we have everything. And, we have things on our website, but that's probably not even a fraction of the things that you'll see if you come and walk around. There's
No
just
kidding.
so much stuff. Yep.
I like to say if it's alive, we don't sell it, but everything else we do. And her dad actually plays around with some fishing poles, and he rebuilds old timer fishing poles, and he'll sell a few of those at the shop, and that kind of brings in some of the recreational people. And when I talk to people that are coming in to look at some of the poles that Bob rebuilds, it's fun because they're like, you just can't get shit like this. This stuff is
Right.
great. That stuff today they make is crap.
I've heard people talk about the difference between commercial quality gear and kind of hobbyist gear. Is there a difference? I mean, you need quality, right?
Size.
But, yeah.
Size matters.
Again, we're still talking about
Yes, we're
oysters.
still talking
Okay.
about oysters. And, we do make some recreational farming products. A recreational farmer doesn't want to hear a little cage that's 300 pounds.
Yeah.
But we'll make the
lifted.
equipment at a much smaller rate. So if I'm making small gear for a smaller farmer that's commercial, we can size stuff down for people.
I think the big thing for recreational is just things that you can pick up and handle with your hands. You're not going to have special gear on your boat or the side of your dock or
Right.
things like that. So it really is just a scale thing. We're
Yeah.
using the same quality materials.
Do you guys do anything with shoreline restoration? I know there's a lot of attention in that direction right now.
There's a lot of attention. We're actually very interested in that area. We've been working with our net manufacturer in Europe actually to make a biodegradable netting specific for that market. So, you put the oyster shells in it, build a reef, do what you're doing, and then over time that bag's going to degrade. So we're going to try to get away from using plastics in the water
Right.
for those kind of projects. A lot of municipalities are actually putting forth projects to do that we bid on for the supplies. Yeah, we love that space.
I mean, I think it's an emerging area. So you're like experimenting with different things?
We're experimenting with different materials, and it's the netting we have. You can smell it. It smells like sugar or maple syrup. So
No
it's a
kidding.
plant derivative. It's really cool.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's very cool. Well, I want to thank you both so much for telling me about Ketcham Supply and the background of it. It was very interesting. Is there anything I missed? Is there anything that I should have asked you about or we talk about? Because I always miss something.
Well, I like to say it's all about flow. If you're going to grow oysters, you better have flow. We always, one of our slogans has always been more flow, more grow, more dough. So that there is key. So if you're going to start a farm, guys, make sure you got good flow.
I think that kind of says it all. And now I have to struggle between multiple different titles for this episode because you've given me a lot of good ones.
Oh, get your ass to work, Kevin.
Yeah. Oh, I will. Thank you again, both of you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you,
and
Kevin.
I
Thanks
can't
for
wait.
having us.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
This has been, it's been
Really fun. That's it for this episode of Oyster-ology. Thanks so much to Heather Ketcham and Myron Horzesky for letting me drag them away from the Virginia Aquaculture Conference for our conversation. What stuck with me from our discussion is how much of aquaculture is about paying attention to the farmer, to their site, their gear, and of course, their flow. Because in oyster farming, there are no shortcuts, only trade-offs. You can rush in, go big, and learn the hard way, or you can listen to the people who have already sunk the cages, lost the gear, bought the birds, and anchored heavy enough to ride out the storm. Thanks so much for listening to Oyster-ology. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow, rate, and share it. It helps other oyster lovers find the show, so help me out on that. And please leave a comment on what you thought about this episode. I listen to everyone, and I would love your thoughts. And as a reminder of Ketcham Supply's #1 key to growing great oysters,
More flow, more grow, more dough.
please be sure to join me again next time as we pry open the shell of another interesting oysterology topic.